Well, good afternoon, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Antilles Economic Spotlight session, where we will be having a discussion with two guests that I'm really keen and looking forward to hearing their contribution. Today I have with me Mr. Adrian Padmore, Managing Director at Brydens Stokes, and his Human Resource Manager, Mrs. Cara Boyce. So Adrian and Cara, welcome and thank you for committing this time to have this chat with us.
Thank you, Shane. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Shane.
Problem. So, guys, I'm going to jump right in because I know that time is of the essence, and you would have afforded me a space, so I'm going to take the best use of it. And Adrian, I'm really going to jump in directly and pose this question to you, and it's one that I feel passionate about because it's one that I think the public has been passionate about, and by the public, I mean even beyond the business community. I think this is something that persons have really started to connect to and pay attention to as a result of COVID. So the reality is a lot has been written about the disruption of global supply chains, again, as a result of the COVID pandemic. And like I said, that discussion has filtered into the conversation of the average person who recognizes that they may not be able to access, certain items that they normally would be able to, including medication and so on and so forth. So my question to you at this stage is really, as a stakeholder and as a key stakeholder, what has been the Brydens Stokes experience since the onset of the COVID pandemic? And by that, how has it impacted you strategically and also operationally?
Okay, so there's no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought a new wave of uncertainty from the very outset. And because as a major distributor, Brydens Stokes sources product from across the world, we felt the impact pretty early on. It varies depending on category and portfolio and country of origin. But basically, the current situation is that supplies are often uncertain. Pricing is, generally speaking, on the rise, mainly driven by freight costs on long-haul routes and availability or unavailability of containers. And therefore, as a distributor, we have had to be exceedingly nimble and creative in forecasting and planning and anticipating what is coming at us and doing our best in order to safeguard supplies. The Caribbean, from a global perspective, is still a small marketplace. And therefore, when multinationals are allocating their limited resources, be it raw material and or finished product, the Caribbean doesn't always become the first choice market to dispatch product to. So things like allocations and quotas have become a real factor in some categories. But I think because of our long-standing relationships and we've been in business for the best part of a century at Brydens Stokes, or previous iterations of our company before the merger, we have long, solid relationships that have afforded us the opportunity to stabilize supply wherever it's possible to do so, and to minimize the impact, which would have been otherwise a lot more severe.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, because I was actually about to ask then, how have you been able to navigate this period? So if my understanding is correct, would you say then that those relationships is really kind of what you've been leaning on to kind of navigate this period, or are there other strategies or approaches that you think have helped you through this very uncertain time for us?
Yeah, so certainly the relationships have helped, but from a technical and capability point of view, we have strengthened our supply chain team in a significant way. So a higher caliber of resources, more emphasis on forecasting and demand planning has started and will continue and intensify. So those are some of the strategic and operational decisions that we've had to make in order to navigate through the global supply chain situation at the moment.
All right, so immediately I'm going to make a mental note because you said something there that I want to jump in and ask Kara. I want to ask Kara about when it comes to the rules and so on within the business. But you also said something else that triggered another thought before. So let me go there before I switch over to Kara.
Sure.
Have you seen then a change in, consumer behavior and confidence since COVID?
Absolutely, yeah, and it started very early on, and I think we'd all know, watching the news, etc. You'd see folks, consumers in supermarkets purchasing large amounts of certain categories out of fear that they would be in short supply. And some of that fear was well founded, some of it wasn't. But certainly consumers' buying patterns have changed. For pharmaceuticals and medication, consumers may be more inclined to purchase 2 months or 3 months supply now at once, rather than 1 month, if financially that's feasible. We're also seeing consumers, because in our situation here in Barbados, with the impact on the economy and employment, the spending power, the disposable income of consumers has been affected negatively. So therefore, folks are now using their choices or exercising choices that enable them to spread their dollar a lot further. So we're seeing smaller shopping baskets, generally speaking. Folks have a tendency to shop a bit more regularly rather than fewer big shops at a time. We're seeing a wider array of more economically priced products going into the shopping basket. And we're seeing folks on occasions deciding, to forego some of the more luxury or indulgent purchases that they would have had before. So clearly there's been an impact globally, but certainly in Barbados on shopping behavior.
Okay. And then by extension, that obviously has impacted how you guys have had to respond, I would assume, when it comes to purchasing and so on and so forth.
Yes. A lot of the predictors and assumptions that we would have built our business on pre-COVID have had to be modified because of the pandemic. There are categories that have grown astronomically. So because folks during lockdown were forced to stay at home, then non-perishables would have increased in sale. Canned goods, for example, as opposed to fresh goods, because that's a category that you could safely buy and store. So we've had to challenge ourselves quite a bit to rethink our approach to procurement and to stay up to date and to make sure we can satisfy our customers and our consumers' expectations. Okay.
Well, yeah, I can relate to that because I can definitely say that during that lockdown period, I ate some things I never really was eating for a while before. So yeah, I can totally understand how that can play out. Okay, all right, thanks for that. That's interesting. Very interesting. All right, so let me shift gears temporarily and go to Kara, because obviously my background is HR. So very early, while I'm not in business, as we were saying, in the corporate setting proper, as I work more in the consulting space now, but I was very attuned to what my colleagues that were still in business with, the experience that they were having. And Kara, this particular one caught my attention from very early on. And essentially, at the very onset of COVID, the narrative was really, to protect employees, or to protect everyone, protect employee safety, and working from home was what was encouraged. However, for the first time, maybe a new type of worker, a new set of workers were now considered to be frontline workers. And this was very topical, especially early on. And many of those types of employees will be found within your industry and by extension within Brydens Stokes. So how did you actually go about mobilizing the workforce who by nature would have been experiencing the same fears, the same reservations as the wider population? but they were still expected to, be working and even now, to still be out there, interacting with persons?
That's a great question, Shane. The pandemic has certainly forced us to test our influence with our employees, right? And I believe what worked well for us was when we decided to build our credibility very quickly. So here we were with a pandemic, COVID-19, upon the country. We did not expect it. We were not sure how to handle it. We had to get our information from somewhere. We had to get our information from the experts as quickly as possible so that when we go to our staff, they understand our approach. They understand that we've been doing our due diligence and just started sharing that information right out, out of the gates with them to ensure that we make the right moves as it relates to them and their families, right? So for us, our first response was one of information. So this is what we've heard, this is what we've learned. A lot of our employees would have been getting information from different sources that may not have been accurate. So we wanted to ensure that the information that they receive was accurate information and, so that they're comfortable and they're up to date. Now, by doing that, it informs our strategy on how we would respond to our particular staff. So our first step was to look at our employees on the front line that were high risk. So those persons who may be of a certain age range or who may have non-communicable diseases and so forth, we would have looked at those employees first and we pulled them off the front line. Unfortunately, because they're frontline workers, they can't work from home, right? So we had to make a business decision to protect them by putting them on special leave with pay until it blew over and until we knew more. Yeah, so that was one of the first things that we did. But how we mobilized the others who were able to go out there on the front line was to ensure that they know that we're accessible, ensure that they have all the right PPE, personal protective equipment to, protect them while they're out there doing the job. And of course that PPE changed, right? So did our PPE budget. We now had to transition into masks. We had to transition into face shields, repurposing gloves as much as possible or replenishing gloves as much as possible. So yeah, we had to ensure that they felt protected, that they felt that the focus was on them. And that built trust really quickly. Another thing that we needed to do was we had to engage them a lot more. Just check in, how is it out there? How's it going? How are you feeling? Do you want to speak to our EAP? Do you have any questions? Because a lot of them were feeling many emotions, anxiety, fear, depression in some cases, because persons were losing their family members as well. Their family members were losing jobs as well within their households. So we had to engage them a lot more. But our strategy has always been, information. We're going to bring the information to you so that you can be informed. We're going to remain accessible. Call us at any time. We're going to do what we need to do to protect you. And that's exactly what we did. And because of that, we built credibility, we built influence, and they felt like, okay, I could go out there, do my job, and my employer, Brydens Stokes, will have my back.
Excellent. So would you say, and I would have asked Adrian earlier about the consumer side when it comes to consumer confidence and behavior. What about the employee confidence and by extension behaviors? Did you see a change, let's say, over the course of this is maybe 18 months or so since kind of the onset? Actually a bit longer than that. But have you seen a difference or a change in behaviors and confidence amongst the employees?
Most definitely. I'm glad that you asked this question because I'm really proud. Let me just say, we usually do our employee engagement surveys, right? And since the onset of COVID-19, what we've done is within our survey, we included specific questions around the management of COVID-19, how the employees felt about, how we responded to it, how we took care of them, etc. And that has been our highest score. So 97% of our workforce believed that we handled and we managed the COVID-19 situation well at Brydens Stokes. And I was really pleased by that. And it really brought us closer together. I mean, when we think about the different initiatives that we did, even when we got to the point of the vaccinations, we had multiple vaccine drives, right? We have multiple sensitization sessions when our employees were impacted in terms of contracting the COVID-19 virus. We would have sent care packages to them so that they're taken care of even while they're at the hotel, right? We wanted them to feel, and have a good meal and that type of thing. And they just loved us even more for it. It brought us really closer together. We learned things about them that we didn't know before. And everyone just really band together as a family. So the confidence within the organization definitely grew on, after our response to COVID-19. And I must say our response was swift. It was a swift response to this particular pandemic.
Okay. All right. So I'm glad to hear that. It sounds bad to say, but almost to the benefit that the relationships have kind of been strengthened as a result of it. We don't want it to take something like this, but I'm glad to hear that it's augured well, at least for the majority of persons. No, you made mention of persons, and to protect the staff, pulling them off of the front line and making a business decision to keep paying persons. And I think that is a good segue back to Adrian to ask this, which is, the business by nature has, if you want to say, dual responsibility. And by that, we can talk about psychological safety. So psychological safety is a topic out there. Persons function better, they perform better, productivity is higher, persons are more creative and innovative, and all these good things that we want in an organization, where there's psychological safety, where persons feel secure, they feel that they can trust, leadership and those around them, where they don't have to fear for their jobs and all of those, those types of things. At the same time, and what may sometimes kind of run in conflict, or may seem to run in conflict with that, is the financial obligations that you have. At the end of the day, the business is there, it has to stay, financially viable. So like I said, the two can kind of run into some measure of conflict. How did you, as the leader of the organization, manage to strike that balance of trying to maintain that psychological safety? And as Cara just said, you have employees that might be losing family members, persons, contracting this virus that we really don't know what is going on, especially in the early stages. So psychological safety for sure is potentially shattered. The business might be compromised. I'm not sure if I'm going to lose my job. But yeah, you can't necessarily pay people indefinitely. That's a reality. So how did you go about kind of trying to strike that balance with all of these different things happening all at the same time?
Well, it comes down to guiding principles, right? I mean, I firmly believe as the leader of this organization, that when people look after the business will look after the people. So that guides us through every day and literally every situation. The pandemic brought so much uncertainty to all of us. And I believe in personally getting in touch with the staff at all levels through town hall meetings regularly, sometimes called a very short notice, I'll admit. But we opted to do face-to-face communication rather than written communication all the way through, because we felt that was more credible, and it allowed for feedback, direct feedback, so we can assess where people were and help folks to settle and to focus. Yes, there's a cost of doing all this. Yes, there was a cost of pulling people off the front line and allowing them to get out of harm's way. But that's our responsibility as a business. And therefore, while we tracked the cost and we tracked the impact and we knew what our capacity to sustain it was going to be, we never had any doubt. And certainly our other companies within the group never had any doubts about whether it was the right thing to do. It absolutely was the right thing to do. As it turns out, we're still very much in the throes of managing in a pandemic world. And there are realities around cost that come with it, whether it be security, sanitizing costs, cleaning costs, transport, various things. Those are new realities. So we just had to accept that we can mitigate where we can, reduce where possible, but we certainly had to accept that there were going to be a new set of costs associated with doing business. But once we can keep our staff safe, and once we can keep in touch with them and keep communicating, then we would get through this together. Cara didn't share it, but those multiple efforts to get our staff educated around the dangers of the vaccine, addressing the fears, the sensitization sessions and the vaccine drives, that all got us to above 80% vaccination rate at Brydens Stokes. And I'm very proud of that, because that's our staff recognizing for themselves that this is important to them, for their safety and for their livelihood and for their family. So we then just facilitated making it easier for them to access the vaccine.
So again, if I'm hearing correctly, then it sounds more so that you've taken, and I'll use your word, by far more of a facilitative type of approach, and leaving kind of decision with them, but putting the framework around which persons can make informed decisions.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, excellent. Now, Cara, let me jump back to you, because in listening to what Adrian is saying, obviously people, again, and I'm biased. I love when I hear that people are very much assent of some of the decisions that are made and so on. One of the things that I was hearing, and I think we all have heard, is that as children, so I'm going to kind of step away from corporate for a minute, just to illustrate this point. When we look at the school system, one of the struggles is that as we move to kind of remote learning environment for our kids and so on, we saw that some persons were kind of being left behind, not intentionally, but just through a lack of resources. Yeah. So there are, and this is internationally reported, situations where a significant percentage of the school roll has not shown up for school for extended periods of time since the onset of COVID. Persons might not have internet, tablets, whatever the case may be. So the whole idea of inclusion has been tested, where we recognize that while you're trying to allow for some measure of continuity, some persons are excluded almost naturally as a result of that. Now, Adrian between yourself and Adrian made mention of like the town halls and the face-to-face communication and so on. But it means that you have potentially a set of employees who are now either A, working remotely, or at least spending some of their time remotely. And they either A, may not have the resources, or two, may not necessarily be as comfortable with this mode of communication. And I mean, again, from my time in company, persons might sometimes prefer to come and knock on your door and, ask HR about a question here about this thing about payroll. We talk about how did the business navigate that? How did you as the HR manager manage that situation where you understand everyone may not be captured as you would want, and really and truthfully, some persons may feel lost or not sufficiently supported, again, in this extremely sensitive time?
Yeah, that was one of the things that we saw early on that we would need to work on. So there were a few things that we did. Of course, the usual WhatsApp chats, making sure persons are accessible. Everyone has, each member of the HR team's direct number or cell numbers. Just, taking that commitment to make sure that we are accessible regardless of the time, because anything at any moment can go wrong with any member of our teams, right? So accessibility was big for us. However, we found some creative ways. The first one was through one of our service providers locally. And there's this option where persons can dial in to town hall just using their cell phone, and the charge is allocated to the company, right? So it didn't affect them in, you know, it doesn't affect their phone packages. Now, of course, like I said, we were learning, right? So the first time we tried it and we were so confident, and we sent out, you know, communication, you will not be charged. And yeah, person's phone plan ran out and everything. And I don't know if you remember when I said earlier about being responsive, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as we got the first complaint, we did a quick survey, figure out, you know, who had, and we trusted them. There was an element of trust, who had a certain amount of funds on their phone, and whether they were impacted, and we just reimbursed them. After that, we got it right. We went back to the service provider, we tested it again, and we've been using it ever since, right? So that our frontline staff would be able to just dial in and be able to access our town halls. So when Adrian mentioned the face-to-face, that would be on like Microsoft Teams, for example, for our persons that have access to the computers. And alongside that, we would also have persons, you know, signing in from my phone. And we just do what we need to do on the back end to make sure that everyone is clear. One of the downfalls with the one on the phone was that some persons would not be able to ask the questions that they would want to ask, right? So after that, there would always be the follow-up, just check in, you know, we'd ask the managers and the supervisors to check in and see whether everything was clear, if they had any questions. And Shane, let me tell you, if one person said that they were not clear, we would do that entire town hall again for that one person, right? They would be our audience, because we wanted to ensure that the message was received. There was another creative way as well that I would like to keep as our internal secret, but it's out there. And if persons would wish to utilize it, they will do some research. But this internal tool allows persons to basically have similarly to a social media page, but on the inside of the organization. And so while it was created for the sole purpose of reaching frontline staff, reaching staff that don't have access to emails and computers, it was also, we also used it to be a bit more creative. So persons can, you know, post about how they're doing today. They can shout out each other on this particular tool. And it's been fun. We engage a lot. And because of that, we can actually go live on this particular tool and have our town halls there. And those persons that may have missed it can go back to the platform, and they can rewatch it and ask any questions, any comments, and so forth. So we've had to be creative. Both those tools that I spoke of came with a cost that wasn't budgeted for this financial year, right? So again, that's just a demonstration of the company's commitment to do what is necessary to be able to, you know, keep the staff safe, keep the staff connected, and just get, you know, achieve what we need to achieve.
Well, I'm hoping that persons, especially the first kind of, I don't want to say tip, but the first solution that you may have mentioned, to be honest with you, I was not privy to the fact that I was available. So I just definitely learned something, and I trust that anyone listening to this session can equally benefit if they, you know, were not aware as well. So thank you for sharing that. Sure. Adrian, kind of doing this like table tennis, I kind of bouncing back and forth between.
I just want to add one thing to Kara's very good response just now, which is that the approach we took really was using technology. We recognized we had to embrace technology, but selecting the technology or the tool to match the equipment or the devices or the access that the employee had. So it wasn't one tool for everyone. We had to find multiple tools and deploy them sometimes simultaneously in order to reach every single employee.
Gotcha. So essentially, true inclusivity, really focusing on trying how do we capture everyone. I don't even want to say most, but everyone. Okay. So Adrian, let me ask you this very targeted one. If you were to identify one key takeaway at the organizational level, what would you say was the primary takeaway for Brydens Stokes coming out of COVID? And I'm saying coming out of, we're still in the throes of it, but you know, emerging from this COVID experience.
agility. We learned very rapidly because of the pandemic and a few other incidents or factors that affected our business right before the pandemic to be agile very quickly, to make decisions a lot faster than we would have been used to in the past. Sometimes with less information than you're comfortable having, but certainly navigating through it and getting to the stage has been a lesson in becoming a lot more nimble and agile in decision making. And I wouldn't say that we've reached the epitome of that either, because there's always room for improvement, but I think we've certainly come a long way.
So I actually want to probe a little bit further, because the whole terminology of agile and agile organizations, it's a thing, it's a concept, and supported by certain principles and so on. And I'm not sure if you were speaking about it through that lens, or just, again, the whole idea of just being nimble. Either which way, I actually wanted to get a little bit more into the weeds to ask, essentially, when you say agile, how does that manifest itself? How has the organization been able to become a bit more agile? If you're able to share any of maybe some of the key tenets there for us.
Well, it depends on the area, because it means different things to different people. So we already would have spoken at length about some of the HR initiatives, which were quickly deployed and continue to be deployed in order to navigate through successfully. In terms of commercially, certainly recognizing the emerging trends in consumers' buying habits and customers' buying habits as well. We were able to make certain commercial decisions that allowed us to participate to a greater degree, or to mitigate what may have been a negative impact. We embarked upon a business transformation exercise in the middle of the pandemic. So that's one thing that was certainly commanded a lot of our attention and time, but we recognize that the pandemic will pass, and therefore the shape of the business coming out of it was going to be important. And while pre-pandemic, or in pre-pandemic times, we contemplated and we started to design what the future business needed to look like, we decided to figure out how to execute and transition during the pandemic. And I think that was probably the most challenging part of our entire journey of the last 2 years, positioning the business to be a lot more customer friendly, a lot more agile in sourcing and procurement than we were before.
Okay. And would you say that those strides that you have made, that is in the kind of restructuring and so on, do you think that, for want of a better term, future-proofs you against the next pandemic or the next big thing that can, impact business? That might be slightly an unfair question, but
Totally.
but what are your thoughts there?
No, is the short answer. Because the future is so uncertain, and that may sound like a cliche, but really, we recognize, and I have a very good management team and a great leadership team here at BSL, and we recognize that the future is changing all the time. So what's important is insights, understanding the trends, interpreting the trends, anticipating what those trends will mean in terms of business and consumer behavior, and then positioning the business to participate. So that might mean deploying resources in an area that 12 months before may not have been as significant, or it may mean throttling back and focusing in other areas. So I wouldn't say at all that we're future-proof. I think every day that we turn up for work, we are staring at the challenges that come at us and wrestling them to the ground, and day by day, week by week, month by month, we are, determined to do the best job that we can.
So you've forced me almost to ask the question that I was playing with from early on. And essentially you kind of answered it already, or at least started to answer the question. I'm going to leave this one open. That is either yourself or Kara, or both of you can tackle it. I just kind of want to approach this question head on, which is around what roles and or skills are now, you would say, the more strategically important to the organization. And this is either roles that you anticipate are coming down the line, or they might be in the business right now, there may be stuff that you're working on. But again, whether it be roles or competencies, based on what you're seeing, based on the changes that you foresee in the business, it might be a change, or it might be that was the most important thing all along. But from a strategic standpoint, are you seeing a difference? And what are you seeing? What are you looking for?
I don't know, ladies first in this instance, Mr. Padmore.
Go right ahead.
So before I answer that question, Shane, if you don't mind, I just wanted to contribute to the discussion on the agility. And, it's twofold for me, because having an agile work our organization means having an agile set of employees, an agile workforce. And I think that what contributes to that is the different elements of agility that we try to reinforce in our leaders, right? So even in our talent management, the way that we do succession planning, two of the critical things that we look for is change agility and people agility, right? And because of that, it positions our leaders then, our persons that are in critical roles, to always be prepared to pivot. It prepares them to constantly be looking for the solutions, and once we kind of develop those habits within our leaders, then you would find that kind of transcends throughout the organization. So again, and I'm in full agreement with Adrian in terms of the future proof. We're definitely not there, but once we build that foundation of agility within our teams, then it means that any crisis that comes up, whether it might knock us off our feet for a bit, the aim is to bounce back quicker if we weren't as agile. Right. So those type of things need to be built in to your talent management, and it needs to be built into your succession planning. As it relates to your most recent question, which I think I've forgotten. So if you don't mind to just give me a quick
so
sum.
You answered part of it already.
Exactly. So when you think about the organization and what is strategically important for you going forward, what are those roles and or competencies that you think will be critical? They may already be critical, or it might be that you're just kind of changing on what used to be the most important thing. Maybe a little bit lower in the pecking order now, so to speak, but we're talking from a strategic importance perspective.
Okay, well, definitely two things. One, the competency end, agility. We don't teach that a lot, we don't look for it a lot. So we need to develop that within the organization. We also need to, well, three things rather. We also need to develop the whole aspect of coaching within the organization. So we had the phenomena of management, then we switched to the phenomena of leadership. But there's this rise of coaching where once leaders demonstrate or practice the coaching behaviors, then that helps a organization to scale its capacity really quickly, right? Because it's no longer what works, but it's what we can duplicate within our teams. And the third thing is something that is on the rise in the US and the UK and so forth, but we're not seeing it quite as much in the Caribbean. And Adrian and we actually had this conversation quite recently when I was updating him on some things that I was doing personally, and that's big data and data analytics, right? I think those are some roles that we should definitely see being introduced within the organization, certainly within our organization in the coming years, because data and big data and analytics can help companies to understand its consumer behaviors a lot quicker, is a lot more thorough. No longer are you relying on gut or guesswork, right? You have information at your fingertips, and it is the entire concept. It's not that that is one rule, but that is a concept that if it is understood and it is appreciated within an organization, then you can have a role that is a critical role within any division. So I can see, how someone that's analytical can play a real significant role within a distribution center, right? Reviewing order fulfillment rates, and looking at the dispatch and that type of thing, right? I can also see how it can play a role in sales, understanding the consumer behaviors, helping you to regularize your pricing strategies, that type of thing. I can see how it can play a role in procurement, right? With these global supply chain situations, being able to understand how to change your forecast, whether based on seasonality or the same consumer patterns. So big data and data analytics, I believe, is a market that we need to tap into. And I would like to see that the roles that are, introduced into the business in the coming years have persons that has that competency to analyze the data and, make informed decisions based on that. So that's where I would contribute. Adrian?
Sure. To add to that, I believe my answer is a lot shorter than Kara's. That successful organizations have to adopt and sustain a continuous improvement mindset. So having good problem solving and root cause analysis skills is inevitably really important in any organization, in any industry. And being an innovative thinker, not being confined to historical and traditional norms, but innovating. And innovation isn't necessarily creating brand new, fantastic products, goods, and services that no one's thought of, but it's also simply just updating and changing and refreshing processes, systems, products, etc. So I like to add those two factors.
Okay. And I was tempted to ask this question. So thank you both. I was tempted to ask this earlier when you made mention of essentially, or you hinted at the analytics and the importance of the procurement function and so on. I said, let me ask this a little bit later and see. And I was glad to hear a few other areas come out, including the agility, the innovativeness, and so on. The analytics is one I'm kind of passionate about, and I mean, I follow a lot of sports, and it's amazing what analysts are doing in the sports space. And I know you mentioned with consumers, but equally with employees. We can use so much data to better understand what employees want, how they will behave, predict certain behaviors internally, and so on. But do you think that the talent is there? Based on what you require and based on your assessment of the market, do you think that we have a sufficient pool of talent? And I would say locally, but if you want to expand it even regionally, when it comes to the depth of skill, same analytics, the innovativeness, the agility, the coaching, and so on, because some of these are relatively new, to be fair. Do you think that the depth is there? If you were to go to market now and say, look, I need this level of talent, do you think you'll be able to find it at the scale that you would want?
I'm assuming that's directed.
Okay. Again, I leave that one open.
Well, I am trying not to be biased based on a recent experience that I've had. Where I was trying to fill a role that required a lot of analysis, right? And data analytics would have been a good background to have, and it was difficult. So short answer: regionally, yes. Locally, I think it will be more of a challenge. But I do know I saw some information from our university here where they've been putting a lot of emphasis on that particular discipline. And I expect that, the millennials and the Gen Zs particularly may be the ones that will lead that charge in terms of data analytics. But regionally, certainly, locally, it's been a challenge. as it relates to the competencies around agility, sometimes I think persons just need to be taught. They don't always come to the organization with that, but once they have the basic foundational principles or the willingness to learn, I think that sometimes we can teach persons how to shift their mindset. It's a mindset thing, right? How to shift their mindset from fixed mindset to growth mindset. So I'm always the one, and well, Adrian as well. But I mean, I always took the horn for the employees. Let's see, let's give them a shot. Let's try first, let's try to teach them. And if we realize that that's not working out, then, we move on to the next step in that process.
So you're saying then that I use the word responsibility loosely, but there is a responsibility on the part of the business to build that capacity. So if you're not seeing the capacity in the market, you are saying, because this tends to be one of those hotly debated topics, who's supposed to be bringing the skills? Is it responsibility of the business to develop it internally, or should the market be producing these people, whether it be on the part of the individual or the university or wherever to be producing them? So you are saying that the business has some responsibility to build the skill sets.
Most definitely. I think it is twofold. We both share responsibility. The university as well, the market needs to recognize what employers are looking for. So for example, if you have a local employer that's consistently going outside of let's say the region, because we still have the CSME that we're trying to implement, in totality. So let's say you have an employer that's going outside of the region for a particular skill set. Then together as universities, let's figure out how can we develop that here amongst our citizens, right? Our people. However, employers also, have the responsibility of building that skill set internally. Right? Persons might come with the educational background, for example, but don't have the experience. And that, I think that's on us. We need to be able to, extend a welcoming hand and say, hey, join our team, we'll teach you. And you would find, right, that a lot of the retention strategies that can help in that regard, because persons then are gaining value from the organization. They're not just there to give, but they felt like I've been here. I joined here in 2021. I've been here for 5 years. This is what I have learned. This is how this organization has developed me. And it really speaks well for the organization. So yes, shared dual responsibility. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you call some words there, succession planning and so on, which suggests that the business is in the business of forecasting and anticipating the changes, and then by extension what you need to do to get there. Unfortunately, I would say that I've had an opportunity years gone to have some conversations with different business leaders and so on, and it was a bit concerning to recognize that quite a lot of persons had never really anticipated what they needed 3 or 5 years down the road, or this is the direction that my industry is going in. So then they were unable to really say to individuals, these are the skills that you would need. And then by extension, for them to be building that type of capacity internally. So what was then happening is that you get to that point 3 years later and you don't have the talent. So I'm glad to hear a lot of what you guys are saying. Now, while my mind is rushing through with questions, I will say maybe that I will ask these 2 more. This one has come up in my feed a lot. Quite a few persons have shared this on my, have engaged me on LinkedIn and other platforms about this. The whole idea of what is being called the Great Resignation or the Great Attrition. And I believe both of you have heard about it. It's been trending everywhere. And essentially that, I don't want to say for the first time ever, but it's really become a focal point that employees are willing to move on from a job if they're dissatisfied. And what you found previously is that persons might stay in the environment and they might be unhappy, or, I don't want to leave this job till I have another job and so on. But I think because of the COVID experience and what did is saying is that persons have a new view of life and what is important and protecting their mental health and these types of things. So what we are seeing now is that person saying, you know, I'm not happy and I'm willing to leave and go to another job that might pay me less. I'm willing to leave and possibly go home and figure it out after that. But it has profound implications for a labor market that may have once thought people not going anywhere, man. Jobs hard to come by. Persons are actually leaving in droves, essentially. From looking at it, do you expect that type of phenomenon, and Karen, I'm coming to you with this, do you expect that type of phenomenon will impact us locally? And if so, how do you think Brydens Stokes would deal with something like that?
You know, Shane, I feel like you're setting me up on this one. But you know, this is a topic that I too have spent some time on, you know, giving it a lot of thought. And I believe it's already here, to be honest. I believe is already with us in the Caribbean. I believe it's already with us in Barbados. If I've spoken to 10 persons, just using pure math, if I've spoken to 10 persons within the last 1 month or so, at least 6 of them have changed jobs, you know? And that's crazy, right? That ratio is crazy. And it's not even a specific role, it's just persons have decided it's time to move. And when I ask the reason, it is either peace of mind or they want to pursue their passion. You know, I've even known some that just went out to do entrepreneurship, right? So I think it is already here. And what we need to do as a company to respond to that is to get closer to our teams. That's one thing. We need to get closer to our teams. We need to ask them what they want. What do you see yourself doing in the next 2 to 3 years within this organization? What will excite you? And creating programs and avenues to get them there. So whether it is doing the usual developmental plans to make sure we support them on that journey, whether it is, you know, just having usual state interviews, that is, you know, one of our responses. What I also think we need to do.
Sorry, Karen. You made mention of a term that everyone listening might not be familiar with, which is the whole idea of a state interview.
Okay.
So I didn't want to cut you, but at the same time, I didn't want you to leave anyone behind. So if you could just quickly say what a state interview is.
Well, that's where you, of course, we know exit interviews, right? So when an employee is leaving the organization, you do the exit interview. What made you leave? The usual questions, right? To be able to learn from that employee's departure. Outside of that, though, I would prefer that we can have a conversation before they decide to exit. So what makes you stay? What are we doing that you know? What are we doing well that you enjoy? Let's do more of that. So I think having more of those state interviews amongst the teams will position you as an employer to understand where their headspace is at, what is dissatisfying about their role, get to that and resolve that before it festers. I think that's one of the things that one of the strategies that we need to employ. But outside of that, I also believe that we need to invest in technological solutions. And thankfully, we have an MD who is very technologically savvy, even more so than I am. And once we can invest in technological solutions that makes the job easier, you know, more efficient, that makes it fast for our employees, that allows them to perform. And when you think about it, employees do not like to be losers. You know, we want to be winners. Everyone wants to be a part of a winning organization. So if we create an organization that allows employees to be able to win and to be able to perform, then that would be an amazing place, and that would make for an amazing culture. And then the final thing is that we need to move it beyond the revenue. We need to move it beyond top line, bottom line. We have to also make them feel like this is an organization that is important to society. I find that a lot of our employees right now, they're wondering, so what do you, and I hear it a lot in the interviews, so tell us, what does Brydens Stokes do within the community? How do you guys demonstrate your corporate social responsibility? And when we start to make it bigger than the business, when we start to make it about the economy, we start to make it about the island, we start to make it about the Caribbean, then employees then lock into a purpose, a bigger purpose outside of just coming to work, doing the job to be able to earn funds. You know what I mean? So it's a mixture of a few
moving
things.
beyond profit, moving the organization.
Exactly. Moving beyond profit to purpose. I actually like that, Shane. Thanks for that.
You're most welcome. Just remember me when you write the book. So thanks for that. And again, I just glanced at the clock and I feel a little too comfortable here. I feel like I have so many other questions I could ask, but I'm going to ask Adrian this one then to kind of close off then. You made mention of it before that the organization has gone through kind of a process of reimagining itself. So this should be easy to answer. If you had to rebuild the organization, if you look back at the last 21 months or so, if you had to rebuild from scratch, and I purposely said from scratch because what you may have built might not have been kind of thinking about it from scratch. You would have obviously had certain parameters within which you can operate. So if you could rebuild from scratch, mindful of this COVID experience and so on, what would the organization potentially look like?
Interesting question. It's hindsight is always 2020. We have the benefit of looking back and seeing what we would have done differently. I believe that, just as Cara spoke of just now, employees that have different expectations of employers. So therefore, I'd want to place that as a foundation. I'd want to understand, I'd want to make sure that we were building from scratch an organization that caters to individuals' needs while still meeting the business objectives. So things like flexibility in terms of work hours and work from home and those sorts of things certainly would be fundamental basic things that we'd have to get and probably jettison a number of the traditional, very rigid employment approaches that we would have had in the past. I'd say also the organization, if we were building it from scratch, would be a high energy organization, because energy is needed to sustain the space and this intensity, and it doesn't really change, right? It may look different, it may manifest itself different from one period or one cycle to another, but you need energy in order to sustain it. And that isn't necessarily youth, it is just energy.
Right.
The organization would also very much embrace technology. I am a not so closet techie, not on the IT side heavily, but I believe technology is there to enrich people's lives. And we shouldn't be afraid of it. We need to embrace it and incorporate it within the workforce to make jobs easier, to make decision-making simpler and faster. And I believe that, the organization I would build from scratch would be very tech forward at every interface, and including providing tech-based solutions to our customers and consumers. We're in the healthcare business. Technology has gone straight into healthcare in many, many ways, as you know. We are in the consumer goods business, and some of our major suppliers invest, significant sums in R&D and innovation each year, with the understanding that the consumer may not know that they need this product, but when I bring it to market and I market it correctly, they will see the value and pick it up. So those are the sorts of trends that I would certainly want to take advantage of if we were building this business from scratch. I was going to say initially that we've almost built it from scratch because of some of the challenges we've had in the last 24 months. But I certainly believe the organization we have today is while it's not where any of us want it to be in terms of performance, in terms of capability, I think it's certainly come a long way. I'm very proud of my staff and the teams that I have working with me. And I'm very excited about the future and what our future results and our performance will be.
Excellent. All right. Well, I am going to stop there, and this is a hard stop. This is me saying, Shane, stop asking the things that are going through your head. So, because this conversation could go on for some time, but it's getting darker. Sorry?
You might need another session then.
Yeah, quite possibly. The recording might cut out on me, and I even was looking at my camera and realizing that the room has gotten darker. So obviously, some time has passed. So, on a serious note, let me say thank you guys so much for taking the time. Again, as I would have said at the very beginning, a whole lot of insights, which is why I have so many more questions in my head. But I as usual, I appreciate persons that talk frankly, that talk honestly, that talk openly. And I think that anyone listening would have been able to pull out some salient pieces that they can possibly either relate to or be applied in their own environment. So thank you for keeping this conversation going. And I really wish you as individuals and as an organization, every success. So thank you, continue to stay safe. And on behalf of Anthony's, we really appreciate this. Yeah.
Thank you as well, Shane. Thanks for having us on the show and for those insightful and sometimes piercing questions. And we hope that we've been able to contribute in some small way today.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you. Have a fantastic one.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All the best.
Okay. Great. Bye-bye.